The Specimen, a novel of horror. The Rider's Saga, Book 1, by Pete Kahle. Read by Wayne June. Brady had the uncanny sensation that someone was resisting his muscles as he tried to push down on the trigger. He tried once more, but again it was as if there was a mental tug-of-war. The chattering voices rose up in his ears, fierce, howling whispers and silent shrieks of insanity, an inner babble that exhorted him to turn away from this path to oblivion. Even so, as the voices rose in volume and the pressure on his hand increased, he finally broke through and squeezed the trigger. The explosion silenced the world. Brady collapsed in slow motion to the ground, realizing a number of cold, hard facts in a fraction of a millisecond. Immediately he knew that he had not died instantaneously. His next thought was that his shot had missed his head. The back half of his skull should have been a large cloud of red mist just now settling to the earth and staining the frost-rimed dirt crimson if he had scored a direct hit. Obviously, he had not. He was bleeding quite a bit, but he should have been killed immediately. Some force had interfered with his aim. The only part of his body that he seemed to be able to move was his left hand, which kept reaching for his face and somehow just missing it. The shotgun had landed directly in his line of sight, a wisp of smoke curling from the barrel. He could still taste the metal in his mouth. His left hand finally made contact with his face, and his worst fears were confirmed. All that remained below his left eye was a grisly, wet pit, littered with shards of bone embedded in the fluttering remnants of his sinuses. His fingers slid down in the meaty mess. His lower jaw had been pulverized, but somehow his entire tongue remained intact, flopping in the bloody dirt like a dying fish. Gradually drifting away from consciousness, there was no bright light that he could see, no stairway to heaven, no elevator to hell, just a blurring of the lines, a fading of the colors. Everything seemed washed out, as if the color was slowly leaching from the sky, the trees, the blood on the ground. Yet something prevented his final exit. Like a rubber band stretched to its limits, he was hauled back into his body against his will. The voices were still there, and they were screaming in terror as the agony of his wounds slammed into him. His left hand and arm were doused with each arcing spurt of blood from his torn carotid artery. His right hand, in fact the entire right side of his body, was paralyzed. He couldn't have moved, even if he had wanted to. The voices changed in tone, rather than giving off the unmistakable aura of fear. He now sensed anger and desperation, as if they understood he was leaving them soon. Whoever they were. Brady knew now that, even though he had completely messed up the shot, he was still bleeding to death. "Soon, Sylvia. Soon I'll have you back in my arms." If he still had anything resembling a mouth, he would have smiled. Slightly more than 3 minutes later, as the tide of blood from his gutted throat slowed from a gush to a seeping trickle, William Brady, aged 57, died alone on the frozen forest floor. His last breath exited his body, and all was still. For a moment it seemed as if the woodlands as one creature let out a pent-up sigh. Suddenly a muscular undulating ripple flowed up Brady's lifeless torso from the lump in his gut. The flesh of his corpse bulged as the object inched toward the bloody cavity in his neck. It reached the gash, tearing open skin and muscle while it pushed itself out in a disturbing semblance of childbirth. Glistening with gore, a small worm-like head with a set of translucent yellow feelers emerged, It tested the edges of the hole before the bulk of the organism climbed out onto Brady's torso. Pseudo-eyes formed on the ends of the feelers and swiveled to both sides. Danger, it thought. It looked back at its bloody cave. Safety. Food, it realized. Without hesitation, the alien creature slid back inside its haven and waited. Eventually, another steed would arrive. They always did.